This is the story of the war between Russia and Ukraine. But before we unleash this masterpiece, like and subscribe to encourage our effort. On February 24th, 2022, the world woke up to a reality many believed belonged to history books. Missiles streaked across the sky, tanks rolled across borders, air raid sirens echoed through European cities for the first time in generations. A full-scale war had returned to Europe, and at the center of it stood one man, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. To understand this war, you must understand that it did not begin on that morning. It did not begin with the first missile strike or the first column of troops. It began decades earlier, with a worldview shaped by collapse, humiliation, and a relentless belief in power through control. Vladimir Putin was born in 1952 in Leningrad, a city that had survived one of the deadliest sieges in human history. Scarcity, discipline, and endurance shaped the environment he grew up in. As a young man, he joined the KGB, the Soviet Union's intelligence service, an institution built on secrecy, loyalty, and suspicion of the outside world. In the KGB, Putin learned that weakness invites destruction, that trust is dangerous, and that power is something you seize and defend at all costs. Then, in 1991, the world he believed in collapsed. The Soviet Union dissolved almost overnight. Flags came down, borders shifted, former allies became independent nations. To much of the world, it was liberation. To Putin, it was catastrophe. He later described the collapse of the Soviet Union as the greatest geopolitical disaster of the 20th century. Not because of ideology, but because of what it represented. The sudden loss of status, influence, and fear. Russia, once a superpower, was now struggling. Its economy collapsed. Its military weakened. Western institutions expanded eastward. NATO moved closer to Russia's borders. To Putin, this was not coincidence. It was encirclement. When Putin rose to power in 1999, he made one thing clear: Russia would never again be weak. Over the next 2 decades, he rebuilt the Russian state around centralized authority. Independent media was restrained, political opposition was neutralized, power flowed upward toward the Kremlin, and ultimately toward Putin himself. Stability returned, but at a price. Freedom was exchanged for order. Ukraine occupied a unique place in Putin's vision of Russia. It was not just a neighboring country, it was history, culture, and strategy intertwined. Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, is older than Moscow. In Putin's mind, Russia and Ukraine were not truly separate nations, but parts of a shared civilization fractured by modern politics. When Ukraine began moving closer to the West, seeking European integration, democratic reforms, and eventually NATO membership, Putin saw more than a political shift. He saw a direct threat. Not just to Russia's borders, but to his narrative. A successful, democratic Ukraine would challenge the idea that strongman rule was necessary for stability. In 2014, the line was crossed. Following political upheaval in Ukraine, Russia annexed Crimea. The move shocked the world, but the response was limited. Sanctions were imposed. Condemnations were issued. But Crimea remained under Russian control. To Putin, the lesson was clear. Bold moves could succeed if the cost was manageable. In the years that followed, conflict simmered in eastern Ukraine. Russia denied direct involvement, even as evidence mounted. Meanwhile, the West debated, hesitated, and avoided escalation. Each delay reinforced Putin's belief that decisive action would always outpace Western unity. By 2021, the situation had reached a breaking point. Russian troops amassed near Ukraine's borders. Intelligence warnings circulated globally. Diplomacy intensified. Putin demanded security guarantees, chief among them that Ukraine would never join NATO. Those demands were rejected. Inside the Kremlin, a decision was made. Putin believed Ukraine would fall quickly. He believed its leadership would flee, its military would collapse, and its people would accept a new reality. He believed the West would protest, but ultimately adapt. Speed and shock, he thought, would secure victory. On February 24, 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine from multiple directions. But the war did not unfold as planned. Ukrainian resistance was fierce. Cities held. Leadership stayed. President Vladimir Zelensky refused to flee, becoming a symbol of defiance. Western nations responded faster and more decisively than expected, supplying weapons, intelligence, and economic support. What was meant to be a swift operation became a grinding war. Sanctions targeted Russia's economy. Assets were frozen. Companies withdrew. Russia became increasingly isolated, yet Putin did not retreat. Retreat would signal weakness. And weakness, in Putin's worldview, is fatal. Instead, the narrative shifted. The war was no longer an invasion. It was framed as defense. Defense against NATO. Defense against Western domination. Defense of Russian identity itself. Inside Russia, dissent was silenced. Control tightened. The state prepared its people for a long struggle. As the months passed, the war reshaped the world. Energy markets convulsed. Food supplies tightened. NATO expanded rather than weakened. Finland and Sweden, once neutral, sought protection. The very outcome Putin feared began to materialize. Yet for Putin, walking away was no longer an option. This war became about legacy, about history, about survival. Not just of Russia's influence, but of Putin's authority. To lose would mean admitting miscalculation, and for a leader who built his rule on strength, admission of failure could unravel everything. The conflict in Ukraine is not just a clash of armies. It is a collision of worldviews. One side believes in spheres of influence, enforced by power. The other believes in sovereignty, defended by resistance. And at the center stands Vladimir Putin, a man shaped by collapse, driven by control, and willing to gamble the future of a nation to avoid the humiliation of retreat. Empires rarely fall in a single moment. They erode through decisions made in fear, pride, and certainty. The war in Ukraine will not be remembered only for its battles, but for what it revealed. About modern power, about leadership, and about the cost of believing that strength alone can stop the world from changing. This is not just a war for territory, it is a war for meaning. And its consequences will shape history long after the guns fall silent. If you found this documentary insightful, like, share, and subscribe.